My name is Jeff Brooks. I'm the CEO of the New York office of Euro RSCG. Really delighted to welcome you all. I don't know how much you guys know about why you're here beyond that. We're going to be talking about the future. The future as it relates to brands, marketers, in the context of major change within the world, which is something that's really exciting to us. At Euro, we have a global mantra or positioning that's called Future First. And what that really means is that if we can have a disproportionate share of knowledge about the future of consumers, the future of categories, the futures of brands, we'll be able to translate that into some type of competitive advantage for our clients. You can't have that kind of understanding without understanding big trends, which is the focus of this morning's panel and discussion. What we're going to do is spend about half an hour with Marian Salzman, whom I'll introduce in a moment, taking us through her trends. You'll notice here that this is called 11.5 observations. Marian's been doing these for us and within Euro for about the past decade. She typically does one set of trends a year. She did 11 trends for 2011 back in December. But with all the turmoil and havoc in the world over the last 6 months between Mother Nature and political upheaval and lots of other stuff, it seemed fitting that we might, for the first time, revisit a trend presentation mid-year and see if what we talked about 6 months ago still holds true and what has changed since then. So that's why it's 11.5. Let's see. I think that the values that we talk a lot about as they relate to marketers that want to be successful in the 21st century, we talk about 3 words a lot. Authenticity, transparency, and speed. Authenticity really comes from deep understanding of insights, whether those insights are about the customer or about a category or about a market dynamic that will shape a business. Transparency is how those insights are ultimately communicated to the customer, which is something that's becoming increasingly important in today's social and digital age. And speed, which is increasingly becoming a competitive advantage. You know, the faster we know this stuff and can socialize it, the faster we can act on it. So I'm hoping that you'll really be stimulated by the discussion. I've known Marian for a decade, so it's sort of silly that I'm going to pull up a piece of paper to do this, but I found a quote that I want to read to give her props. The Guardian wrote that she radiates enough energy, one suspects, to power a small town, and looks as if she just stepped off the set of Sex and the City. Not the one in Dubai. That was awful. She's been credited with popularizing pop culture buzzwords from singleton to metrosexual. She lives and breathes social media and has long before social media was even a construct or a buzzword, and she knows what's coming next. She's Marian Salzman. She's the CEO of Euro RSCG Worldwide PR and a member of the management team of Euro RSCG, the agency. In just 2 years in her current role, about 2 months ago, she had the privilege, and we had the honor of attending an event where she was recognized as PR Week's 2011 PR Professional of the Year. In addition to the PR job she does, she's also one of the world's most recognizable and famous trend spotters, and she's done work for Forbes, the CMO Network, CNBC, PR Week, Marketing Week, and the Huffington Post, among many others. So I'm delighted to have her here. Would you please join me in welcoming the prophetic, the prolific, and the very personable Marian Salzman.
And how about we add the aging rapidly? Because even Sex and the City characters grow old really fast, especially with lots of frequent flyer miles. Let's talk about trends. And you know, as soon as you finish these things, you're always wrong because they're outdated. So last week I thought I was really hip and cool because I knew absolutely everything about what was happening in the world. And then I spent the weekend in Barcelona and I realized that 21% unemployment is reshaping how that culture thinks about how people spend their days, and you come back and you think about what's happening in our own Republican caucus, and you realize our own employment numbers are so misreported that we now need to start to think about trends through this lens of what happens when as much as a third of the population truly are adult and not working. But we really look at trends because at the end of the day, when you're thinking about brands and big brands, you need to say what's actionable, what's going to motivate people, what's going to turn people on. We identify these things because at the end of it all, we need to have long-term strategies. Long-term today means something very different than it did when I started off doing this 20-something years ago, because long-term is 12 months. 12 months is the equivalent of writing a 100-year plan when I began my career, before there was the internet, before the computer could talk to you, when social meant golfing with clients. It's a really different world. Nobody had BlackBerry neck when I started off. The worst thing you had to worry about was your heels were so high that your calves were going to crack. It's completely different. We need to really figure out those unexpected opportunities that can help transform brands and transform businesses. Most people don't know the dirty secret of metrosexual. I wish it was created because it was a grave social phenomenon about the feminization of men. But we had known about it actually for a year and a half. There have been all kinds of data sitting on my wall in the CBI lab here. We couldn't peddle it to anyone. And Peroni Beer, an SAB Miller beer brand, asked us to bring and import a full-calorie but light beer into the US, and suddenly there was a reason to talk about the fact that men felt they were no longer CEO of the bedroom or the boardroom, but they could control the kitchen. And it was with that phenomenon we did an open focus group with the New York Times, and we simply asked the Times, who was in those days under scrutiny because they were perceived as not being real kosher with data, we made them sign a non-disclosure for us that they wouldn't share our beer data if we gave them the data about how men felt about their own sexuality. And that launched the metrosexual mania. It's about managing change to understand the drivers of business, social, and consumer trends, because you really can spot them absolutely anywhere. When you leave here, I'm going to argue that each one of you effectively could be as good or better a trend spotter than I am, because it starts off with being young. It starts off with how you push your supermarket cart. If you just push your cart, whether you do it online or in the actual place-based supermarket, you just push it and you just buy what's on your grocery list, you are not a trend spotter. If you're there to graze in other people's carts, to sort of shop through other people's minds, to mind other people's business, to look at what's going on in the tabloids, to understand all those human motivations, because it's really about people, about social momentum, about companies, about radical breakthroughs, about economies, about brands. If you really dig in the right way, you'll discover things that you never thought about before. I'd argue that I read the newspaper very, very differently than other people. I read a different set of newspapers than other people do because I'm looking for different kinds of data points. Things that other people find silly, I find really pretty amazing, and yet everyday news could go right past me. So I'm far more amazed that Michelle Bachmann is being repainted as the Mother Teresa candidate than I am by almost everything, because suddenly she's going to turn foster parenting into the new must-do. So if you're not currently signed up to be a foster parent and you want to be a vibrant Republican, you better fill out your paperwork. Spotting trends is really big business for those of us who've got to be thinking ahead, whether it's about yourselves or because you're working on behalf of a client. And really that's all of us today, because in some format we are trying to anticipate change. We want to understand how to get there ahead of our competitor, whether our competitor is our next door neighbor, whether our competitor is somebody else's kid in school, or our competitor is another brand that we're trying to beat for just a little bit more share. So the trends that we've identified right here and now, and by here and now I'd say the last couple of weeks, because you can never get it completely right, because there'll always be an assassination of Bin Laden or a horrible weather incident in Missouri. Here they are. The first is that Mother Earth, she's really been on crack and she totally needs Valium. I've been talking for a while about the fact that all that deodorant my peer group used in the 70s and 80s when we were in gym class, Gillette should be bombed for this, but we really, we did terrible things to the planet Earth. Today we've watched, the big freeze, we've watched tornadoes ripping across the southern US. We've participated in raising funds for flood victims in Pakistan and Sri Lanka and Australia. There's been heat waves in Russia. There's been torrential rain and then mudslides in Brazil. A Japanese earthquake, a tsunami, earthquakes in Haiti, in Chile, in New Zealand. And if you haven't noticed it, seismic events are getting to be more and more frequent. And if they weren't getting to be more and more frequent, the 24/7, 365 news culture means that there's always a breaking news alert. And just in case you weren't there, there's some place where it's going to happen right now. So the jury is still out on whether or not it's man-made, but the climate is changing and it's getting really, really weird. So weird climate is definitely an element of the now. So we need to figure out whether what's going to do California in is not Arnold's sex life, but it's actually going to be the final big earthquake. Whether or not Yellowstone is going to blow the big grand finale, and we'll end up with a ringside seat and then the taxpayers' bill to figure out what to do with the national park. It's going to only be a massive injection of additional money to figure out how to stop the catastrophe that's going to come on the other side of all this weather ruination. And we need to really figure out how big a dose of Valium we need to really calm down Mother Earth. But what can we do? Defensively, as business people, we need to be sure we're better prepared to deal with all of this seismic change than Tokyo Electric Power was, because not all of us are going to behave like the Japanese did and bite our lip and keep going. We are really all angry as hell about the condition of the planet, and we will not tolerate whomever does it. If there is big blackouts, brownouts, and power grid issues, even in the New York metro area, it's not going to go very, very well for public transport. You are going to have a civil rebellion. If you are part of that process, you're part of the delivery chain, you're part of the logistical chain, you're going to have problems. So you're also going to see that I have organized the whole world now into a simple pound tweet, because if you can't define it in less than 140 characters, it's not literate. Because none of us care any longer about nouns, verbs, constants. Forget about it. That's all very old and taboo. Really, at the end of the day, it's really that mama needs pills. So if there's a piece to remember, just take that one away. The next, and again, there's been more breaking news on this since we wrote it. Tobacco, trans fats, cell phones. Your cell phone is the evil empire. If any of you men have it in your pocket and you plan to have incremental children, take it out right now. FedEx it back to your home, put it in the freezer, and I would probably leave it there. The cell phone is not a happy friend of fertility. It's not a happy friend of brain health, and it's going to really be the new tobacco. If any of you are part of a company that markets them, sells them, panders to them, programs into them, I'm going to tell you that the issue is not going to disappear. What we're going to come up with is all new ways to talk about this form of connectivity, because while teens in particular are spending more time texting than calling, and a landline is downright old-fashioned. I mean, a landline is almost something that's a museum quality piece. I don't know my landline number. I'm not even quite sure why we pay a phone company for one, but I think it's sort of a vestige of being a responsible adult. You're supposed to have a landline. It's just when somebody asks you what's your phone number, you can actually fill in the blank. But you know, we have this problem because these things are cancer producers, they're fertility suckers, and we're going to end up recognizing that there's big problems. The other problem with these things are reception issues. We know that they really just don't work. When you most need that call to go through, they're not going to happen. So we're going to really see that fear, uncertainty, and doubt market into it, because these things are just really not going to be our big friends. So I'd say pound, now what? But watch for the big cell phone debate to really take off. Trans fats, we know they're really ugly. We know they're really bad. We know they're going to be stripped out of almost everything we eat and do, and that eventually they'll just be gone. We're going to need to figure out what's going to happen when cell phones and that kind of microwaving of the brain and microwaving the testicles, when that has to go next. Certainly we're going to see in the near term, I think, a lot of legislative debate about the cell phone for people under 14 when the skull is not yet hard. Okay, water, the new oil, or the next oil. It sounds like something that doesn't make a lot of sense, but we really, I think, are entering a time when we've been talking and talking and talking about it, but it's going to soon become a really scary truth. And I'm not talking about bottled water. which is already really an expensive luxury item. It's sort of embarrassing to order in a public venue. I mean, if you notice that we've gone from it needing to be a designer accessory you had to have at a restaurant meal to being something you sort of mumble when you order because you feel quite embarrassed that you're paying for something that's available for free. But the reality is that the drier places in the world have long lived with drought, and they've squabbled over water resources for the basics of growing food and for drinking water. And now with modern consumption and hygiene habits, population growth, we're really draining reservoirs. We're really seeing groundwater drying up faster than ever before. Whole seas are actually shrinking. We're seeing Lake Mead down considerably, and we're seeing 1/3 of the counties in the lower 48 states at the risk of water shortage. Water is going to be a huge election issue. Water usage for every company that taps into water is going to be a big topic of contention. And this slowly unfolding water crisis is going to give businesses an opportunity to roll out their water-efficient products and their water policies for newly conscientious consumers. No business like flow business is going to be, I think, a very big topic. What's not onlineable is going to be doomed. I worked at Chiat in the days when we moved over to the virtual office, when you were told to get rid of all of your possessions and go over to 3 pieces of paper and 4 file folders, and people thought we were certifiably nuts. Well, like everything that's really trendy, it takes an awful lot longer to be true than you expected. So that was 1992, and this is now. So again, lots of things happened. But I think we're almost at this crazy place where it's got to be online to be valid. CDs made LPs obsolete, and then MP3s made CDs obsolete, and then DVDs have started replacing VHS tapes, and then DVDs are under pressure from DVRs and on-demand delivery systems. But what we really are experiencing now is a much faster rate of change. If you think about it, the digital camera hit in the early 2000s, and in 2005, Kodak's digital products and services overtook the film product sales. Now, who actually needs a camera when a mobile phone can take the pictures and upload them to view online? Absolutely, virtually in real time. It's as quick as your thumb works. Your thumb is, by the way, one of your most important organs. Who ever knew that this was going to be a really important thing that you wanted to protect at all costs? But I mean, a damaged thumb is like having half a brain. Okay, so printed books, magazines, newspapers are actually selling less, but the content is being consumed more and more on computers and on pads. In February of this year, ebook sales overtook print book sales with a 202% month-over-month increase. What does that really mean? It means that the e-version of content is the new normal. We've got to be able to do things online, and that includes having online friendships. If you're not online, you're sort of out of this sphere. Brands or products that have smart online elements are going to beat those that don't. On one level, it's very, very obvious. On another level, it appears to be less obvious to people than you think. And again, I'm really going to say that they have got to come online with character, they've got to come online with transparency, and they've got to come online in real time, 24/7, 365. Instant in online is truly instant. It means immediate and real. It doesn't mean canned or disingenuous. So get on or go home. And go home really means go live the life of the Unabomber minus the violence. If you're not online and active, you may as well just shut down. So this next one I think is really important. This is a really important visual image. I'd like you all to realize this is the way most of you look at your family dinners on Friday night. An average American family is probably 4 to 5 people, all with BlackBerries, mostly talking about each other through instant messaging while they're sitting at the table. They're sometimes talking about other people's families as well if it's a public domain. The new social, we could call it antisocial, but it's something more than that. We all love social media, but sometimes its paradoxes are plain ridiculous or tragic. It used to be that we would smoke a cigarette or we would sip a drink in order to be a little bit less uncomfortable. But now if we're nervous in a social setting, what we pull out our BlackBerries, we pull out our iPads, and we start checking our Facebook or our Twitter. We start updating them so we don't have to look at the other people in the room, because it's so much more uncomfortable than communicating about what we're doing to people we don't have to look at. It's another thing too in terms of walking along the street, oblivious to people that you're walking into until you bump into them. So there's going to be all kinds of traffic controls put into place about no BlackBerrying and no iPadding and no iPhoning when you're on public space. The new social actually also interrupts physical interactions with people. I mean, the New York Times has now sort of taken this trend over, and they've done a really nice style piece on this. But the idea about flitting from face-to-face to online, how long is a quality online conversation before it's okay for somebody to flip to their favorite device? You tell me. I mean, how long after sex is it okay before somebody should be checking their BlackBerry, reporting in? There are all new rules and codes being written. In another 10 years, it's going to even be more compelling to conduct all of your social interactions through this technology. It used to be that you took your backpack with you to the office or to school. Today, your backpack is that office, is that school. There really is no reason to go anywhere to be social. Your friends, fans, and followers can be with you absolutely everywhere. As more and more social interactions get mediated by tech, there's a huge scope for making money with hardware, software, and the services that enhance them. And I'm going to say that this is the true new social security. The other one may fail us. All the money may bomb out. Your real social security is having that device, because no matter where you are, if you're online, there's always somebody to talk to. You will never be alone. It doesn't matter if you're 8 or 80. Somebody will be there to keep you company. Okay. Homo sapiens 2.0. It's all about the end. So we had our whole life stage of the I, and the I was very selfish, and the I was all about me, and the I was all about the E and the electronic, and now the whole world is going end-focused. N for neuron, and for brain products, and for boosters, and for nutrients, and for games, and for engagement. You've got to get inside people's brains by becoming a detached anthropologist so that you can figure out all those key points that are going to let you get inside their heads. But you've got to also figure out how to turbocharge all your products and services to make them smart. This is really going to be the next couple of years, the decade or the mini-decade of the brain, where people are going to spend all their time trying to figure out brain health, because if 50 is the new 30, the 50-year-old brain is still not a 30-year-old brain. We've got to figure out how to work that organ out to make it as smart as possible. Also, while we're sitting here and while our children in this country are sitting here, children in China and India are cleaning our clocks, or the clocks of our children, and we need to be very, very conscious of the fact that that kind of schooling is going to be more important than ever before. And so brain food and nutrients, all that stuff that's going to enhance and change, is going to be really crucially important. You're going to see all kinds of enhanced products coming down the pike. The word smart is going to be one of the best enhancers of any product or service. Okay, hyperlocal is the new global. We were exhausted by global. Global is one of those ridiculous things that involves standing in an airport, standing on an airline line, involves foreign languages, it involves all kinds of things that today we don't need, because in fact the opposite is true. Hyperlocal is really where it's at. It's great to know what's happening in other places, but what's really interesting and really useful is about the size of the world you'd let your 11-year-old go on 2 wheels, whether it's a skateboard or a bicycle. And that's about as big as the world where we can be guaranteed virtual relevance. So whether you get into a debate about whether or not you should have commuters coming from UBS in Stanford to UBS at the World Trade Center, that's now considered a real journey, that 1-hour commute on Metro North, because it's no longer a hyper-local. What you're going to see, too, is more and more of the online services that come down to absolutely where you live, where you work. So whether it's Groupon, it's Living Social, it's Patch, it's the new beta system for Google.com offers. It's where you are with your mobile device in terms of Foursquare or Gowalla. It's how news is delivered to you. It's how information is delivered to you. It's the hyperlocal, such as Patch, that's reporting in almost real time with reporters that are in and out of the community, broadcasting delivered through the internet, and bloggers and local loggers that are really putting in and building in local CSR, hyperlocal media using the real-time multimedia, interactive power of the internet to strengthen these connections within and between local communities, local being very, very intimate. People are fed up with what feels very far away. Great to read about but keep it away from me. So businesses are also able today to track choices better than ever before, and hyperlocal makes them more relevant to consumers. So I want to know down to exactly what that offer is. Now, all these hyperlocal shopping services are going to have to move away from mani and petty offers. There's just too many of them coming. It's going to have to become much more sophisticated in terms of what are you going to be selling me and how are you going to be selling it to me. But you're seeing more and more interest, for example, as we go into election season in local elections than ever before. Local politics is a new priority. Local coverage of local sports. High school sports on the rise in a way hasn't been in a long, long time. So what you're seeing is pound local for local, but really people going crazy for just that. Next one is the idea of brutal honesty. It might be a synonym for transparency, or it might be something more. Awesome basically killed us. Years of playing nicely. I mean, Mr. Rogers was really death to many people. He really dulled all our sensibilities, and what he didn't do, political correctness, really killed us. And HR has made it even worse with everybody's done a great job, and everybody gets a medal, and the Little League gives everybody a trophy for mediocrity. And this widespread condition of absolutely everybody going forward so that you cause no offense. It's complete lunacy, and the time has come for a real backlash against that. So no wonder the Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother caused this stir, because it was really brutally honest. I mean, Americans understand deep down that if winning means anything, there's got to actually be a loser. But yet we have taken away in most high schools the ability to rank a child, because if somebody's 1, that means somebody's 9, and if somebody's 9, that means somebody's 90, and if somebody's 90, that means somebody might be 350, and 350 might be stupid. And if you're the parent of the stupid child, you would have to actually look yourself in the mirror and say, I lost. And we're not very good at that. So you've got to think about what all of these reality TV shows are teaching us about losing. They're actually sensitizing us to the fact that there will be losers. Think about what Simon Cowell had to say. If I said, good job, awesome, well done, it would make me actually look and feel ridiculous. It's quite obvious most of the people who turned up for the audition were hopeless. And most people who turn up for life are hopeless. And we're going to become brutally honest about just that fact. Because we're going to learn to deal with the challenges of China and India and toughen up, because we are golden retrievers in the world of Rottweilers. And we're going to learn to survive in a way that's very, very different. And it's going to start with the tell it like it is honesty. And we're going to see a lot more brutality in terms of how we speak to one another as a consequence. All the messaging is going to begin to change, because it's going to have to locate that sweet spot between the hype and flannel at one extreme and the really fierce brutalness at the other. But you're going to see a real change in tonality, I'm going to argue, and it's really going to happen very, very quickly. So think of it this way, pound, just say it. Stop with all of the preamble and get to the bloody point. Okay, so this one, I've set you up for now, I'm getting to the bloody point. Beached white males. Newsweek sort of upstaged it a bit, because they've sort of tackled this topic, but not a pretty vision. But after the recession of the early 1990s, Falling Down portrayed an average Caucasian male railing against downsizing immigrants, crime, an anti-male legal system, commercial hype. And for 2 decades, this angry white man, the AWM, has been an increasingly influential figure. Think about him as Joe the Plumber. Joe the Plumber was humorous on one level, but Joe the Plumber really spoke to and appealed to an awful lot of people, because he was them. He was the person riled by affirmative action, by the rise of women, by the decline in the blue-collar occupations. And now the Great Recession has birthed what Newsweek is calling beached white males. They're better educated than the angry ones, because they actually had a really good run on their surfboards until they hit the beach, and now they're really dead as doornails. They were used to earning a lot more and living the dream, but they find themselves really pretty surplus to the needs of this straitened economy. It's tough times ahead for these guys. They didn't buy in many ways to something very, very basic to the new social economy, which is if you don't type, you can't compute. If you can't compute, you can't compete. They thought that was a really silly observation in the mid-90s. And so just the fact they never exercised those fingers means they are really today left out. There also is a real problem because the nation's finances are in a really deep hole. Educated women have become increasingly influential and more inexpensive to employ, I'll point out. Hispanics are growing fast in numbers, and the US has lost its #1 status globally. So beach white males are worth less to marketers, but as their spending power and their employment status sinks, they really need to come to the surface as somebody who needs to be loved by brands. So if you have a down market brand, if you have an escape brand, they are waiting for you to love them because nobody loves them right now. They have bad breath and body odor, and they are just feeling really vile and ugly. And if you want to give them the big group hug, they are ready to be truly loyal to you. So pound tough love. Next one, more real than real. This one ties a little bit into the brain trend, but the idea that we today have unreal reality that is so much more real that we didn't really need to go with those Navy SEALs into that Pakistani compound because we kind of knew exactly what would be going on there because we'd seen it on all of those computer simulations all those years. We knew exactly what was happening between CGI and 3D, between the stuff the movie makers had already shown us and in the world of virtual reality. We understand how unmanned drones fly, and we understand how civilians immerse themselves in hyper-realistic computer games. We could start to imagine. But also, it doesn't actually take fancy graphics. Interactions on text-based social media platforms such as Facebook are typically experienced as absolutely the same as a conversation. We don't know what talking is anymore. In fact, is voice a nuisance? And I'm going to begin to argue that voice has become a nuisance, and as brand marketers and as people that are trying to convince people of something, one of the worst things you could possibly do is a robocall. One of the worst things you could possibly do is repetitive messaging on a TV series, because that is a nuisance. That voice is actually the opposite of a text interaction, which feels real, which feels like communication between me and you. As computing power increases and technology companies refine offerings, consumers increasingly find ordinary life experiences less real than mediated virtual experiences. And there's a whole lot of opportunity for brands to jump right in. So in the struggle for consumers' attention, there are really two options. You can go with the big bucks like Matrix and Avatar levels of vividness, or you can get much smarter with this really brainiac kind of an engagement. And that really puts braininess at an absolute premium. And this is what I'm going to call pound virtual necessity. Okay, the last one I'm calling bankrupt and broke chic. But it's really okay today to be broke. Most of our credit ratings really suck because the real estate market did it to us, and there's no reason to apologize about it. Until a couple of years ago, ordinary Americans could taste the high life because of a home equity line, because of smart juggling of credit cards. By the end of 2010, 11.1 million US households, 23% of all homeowners were in negative equity, with no prospects of the housing market picking up, maybe for forever, but certainly for an awfully long time. Although things have bounced back for the top 1%, the remaining 99% aren't in great shape. They have to keep going. And if there's any consolation, it's that the shine of the 1% is much less bright than it was before the financial meltdown, because it's not chic to be rich anymore. In fact, it's really unchic. The rich are really embarrassed, and they are being made to be more embarrassed by being wealthy. It's really much cooler to be Main Street than to be Wall Street. Hedge fund people are not really called hedge fund people. The trendy phrase for them is hedge clippers. They're really kind of uncool people that you don't want to associate with because their money is perceived as having been earned off the back of everyday Main Street. You've got to expect America's ingenuity and love of the comeback to reinvent this gritty chic by battling for the bankrupt and the broke. The great thing about this country, the thing that differentiates it from Europe, is our belief that it doesn't matter how many times you fail. We all learn in school the story of Ray Kroc, bankrupt numerous times, and then he founded McDonald's. We really look forward to, we love the idea of the guy who bounces back with the next great idea. We've got to speak authentically and speak honestly to the condition of people around the world who have a lot less than they used to, but still have self-respect and hope. Your credit rating is not who you are, and we need to be very, very aware that we can't keep telling people to believe in saving. We need to tell people to believe in coping, and that is the new dilemma as we're making news in and around the financial area. We need to talk to people about being part of making the community a better place, because that's what's really going to sustain them. So the think pound comeback kids is an important one. And the point 5 is the idea of new traditions. Everybody likes traditions. I mean, think about how we all stop, way more Americans percentage-wise stop to deal with the royal wedding than any other culture in the world, including Brits, who had a long 5-day weekend but didn't really care very much what was going on in their capital. But we can't really wait around for years for an enjoyable one-off. Modern life and interactive technologies distort the fabric of space and time. In the internet age, anything that's happened 3 years running is well on the way to being a new tradition. So think about things like South by Southwest, founded in 1987, Little Lebowski Fest, founded in 2002. These things seem to feel like they've been here for forever. With the echo chamber of interactive multi-channel technology, any event that has traction hits multiple touch points and creates numerous cross-references, making it feel familiar very quickly. We're looking for those things that feel familiar very quickly. We're looking for things that become ritualistic. We're looking for a whole new calendar of traditions that we can anticipate and that help us shape the lives and the flow of busy lives. The big opportunity is to identify emerging new traditions and align with them and or seed new ones. We like things that are ritualistic. We will really buy into them. We will celebrate them. We'll celebrate them at the 1-year anniversary. We'll celebrate them at the 6-month anniversary. We'll embrace them and do them. Pound practice equals perfect. We like the idea of again and again. So what does it all mean? The unexpected quakes, whether it's the death of Bin Laden or it's the perma rattles in Tokyo, cause lasting shudders. Nobody's going to forget either of those two things. If you were old enough to watch it, it's branded in your brain. The real-time news ticker with the stock indices gives us all a minute-by-minute measure of the ROI of the consuming life. And we know the consuming life right now is really miserable and it's getting worse. Anybody who thought the economy recovered now realizes we've hit the debt ceiling. We've probably are dipping back into a really bad economic time. We've absolutely become bad news bears. And just like we like to discuss the lousy weather and Mother Earth on crack, we like to discuss the stock market tanking for how many weeks in a row and still going. Miniature, flexible, portable, from the cloud to the idea of we can carry our clouds with us everywhere because they are ubiquitous. Place doesn't matter very much. What matters is our ability to do what we need to do where we need to do it. Everything changing faster, more furiously, sometimes with less purpose than ever. ADD is the new normal. If you can't multitask, you're a white elephant. Anybody who can't multitask should just crawl into a hole and just claim disability and take your benefits while they still can pay them. And as for the new normal, events like Wienergate have actually changed our focus. We debate the role of Facebook and Twitter, but we never name the brand of camera. Do you notice that no one talks about what brand of camera any of those photos were taken on? Nobody mentions that, but yet we talk about Facebook and Twitter. Suddenly the new power brands in this whole mix are the names of the services that conveyed them, are the places where he hooked up with these faceless, nameless women who are only famous if they hire Gloria Allred or if they look for their own book or magazine deals. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Marian. That was a lightning tour of a lot of really, really deep stuff. And we have presentations for everybody who didn't take notes, and hopefully if you have follow-ups, we, the agency, or through Marian can connect some dots for you. In that spirit, what we're going to do for the next 30, 45 minutes is a panel. And that panel will consist of Marian. I will help moderate it and facilitate it, but more importantly, we have two esteemed panelists joining us today. I will introduce them now, and then I guess we'll all come up here and take seats. The first is Ed Sanders of Google. Let me tell you a little bit about Ed as he comes up. Ed has done major branding initiatives on YouTube, Android, Google TV, and other business and consumer products. A former media and M&A lawyer.
I'm not supposed to say that.
He worked in sport and entertainment marketing in Sydney, Beijing, and London, and also founded a digital and linear entertainment rights business in the Pacific Rim. He has an MBA from INSEAD, an honors degree in the arts and law from University of Sydney, and last but not least, he is a rugby-loving Francophile whose favorite room in the house is the kitchen. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
He's already living the dream and the trend.
That's right.
And next, very fortunate to have Jeff Chu, an editor from Fast Company, with us today. Jeff edits stories on topics ranging from the Chinese marketplace to urban affairs to social enterprise, philanthropy, and technology. He was part of the launch team at Condé Nast Portfolio, and before that spent 7 years at Time Magazine, in which time, as a London-based writer, he wrote about the business of James Bond, the plight of Zimbabwean dissidents, and the tribulations of Tony Blair. And then as a New York editor, has covered religion, culture, society, and everything in between. Jeff's a graduate of Princeton and the London School of Economics, and we're delighted to have him here as well. So if Marian would be kind enough to join these esteemed gentlemen, what I'm going to do is just get us started with 2 or 3 questions that occurred to me as I was hearing Marian's talk. I want to get more of a macro perspective on it, and then really want to turn the mic over to you guys to ask any questions that you have. And I'll sit over here. I think one of the first questions that was really interesting and provocative, the whole notion of the new social being antisocial. And I'm curious for each of your perspectives, based on the lens from which you see the world and see business, if this is a trend that you're seeing take greater root. I recently read a book called Alone Together. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's about why we expect more of technology than each other. And as the parent of a teen and a tween, some of the stuff that I read in there legitimately frightened me, because the dynamics that you had on your screen there are ones that a lot of us, I think, live and breathe every day in our homes. 2-part question. How do you see the trend taking shape? And then what do you see as the potential near-term impact for brand marketers?
Shall I start? That's an easy one to start with. I mean, it is a fascinating trend to observe. I mean, anyone who goes out to dinner and has meetings with people, you just want to throw them out the window half the time. You know, are you talking to me or are you talking to other people? But I think technology always goes through cycles, and I think email was such a revolution in ways of communicating en masse with people right around the world, but it's almost become a bit archaic, and we all know, I'm sure we're all sitting here racking up hundreds of emails in our inbox and desperately probably trying to check them while I'm talking. But I think people are realising that that's become an inefficient way of communication, and a lot of what I do is about storytelling through brands, and I think there are some things that will never change. The raw human emotional connection to a story and the way that conversation happens. The means changes, but I think the content doesn't. And I think what's really interesting is we're seeing a lot of technological shifts enabling old style conversations through new technology. So, you know, Skype and you know, Google Chat and the sort of proliferation of video as broadband speeds increase. I think old style face-to-face communication is actually coming back. Email and those sorts of means of communicating are an easy way to hide behind the brutal honesty that Marian was talking about, and I think that technology has almost a responsibility to encourage old school forms of communication which provoke brutal honesty and a lack of sort of the antisocial. So that's my perspective.
And I think what we're seeing at Fast Company as we're looking at social media, for instance, is a shift from more forms of media that just project at you, like blogs, more towards a Tumblr, which is more of a conversation, a constantly ongoing conversation. So it's a different form of storytelling, but it's coming closer and closer to the old forms of communication. And I think the brands that are figuring that out are learning which medium is right for them. An example I have is Sylvania, the light bulb company. You know, they haven't really done much on Twitter because they figured out that consumers aren't the ones they're going for. Instead, they set up a proprietary social media platform for their wholesale buyers and for bulk buyers because that's their audience. So it's really for us about figuring out which platform your community is on and what's the best way to cultivate the conversation with that community.
Marian, question for you. So were the guys at Crispin and Burger King prophetic with the whole Whopper sacrifice notion, that at some point the notion of shedding friends or dropping technology, if I take it to the hyperbole, or scaling back your social life is actually a future-facing trend?
I think they're prophetic that they knew that a brand can no longer buy noise unless they truly make news. So I think it was less about what they actually accomplished in doing so and more about the news stir. I think the real truth of today's marketing environment is you've got to co-opt what you can't buy. You've got to co-opt the evening news, and I think that's what they really effectively accomplished. They turned all of us into human media where we discussed their campaign. They could only buy so much with that advertising, but they could buy all of our dinner parties, all of our commuter conversations, all of our debate about whether or not we would really give it up. Did we mean it? What were we trying to do? What were they trying to do? So I think that was the beauty of their insight, was really a recognition that, God, this is going to make news. I mean, I'll give you a second example. I think that a brand today has a terrible time when they're simply running an ad, breaking through any kind of clutter. I can't think of anything that is so unbelievable, maybe with the exception of when Chrysler tried to re-embrace Detroit for that one seminal moment. That's probably the only thing I could think of without a lot of news making made news. And so I think that every campaign today needs to say, okay, but what's the conversational currency that's going to flow ahead of, off the back of? How is it going to be trending on Google? You know, I think that at the end of the day, that's how we judge ourselves.
That's interesting. It's making me think, and I promise this will be the only time I shill, and this is totally spontaneous. But it's making me think about the Dos Equis campaign here, and the most interesting man in the world. It was the first beer brand to reach 1 million likes on Facebook, but the character who's become so popular in culture doesn't actually have a presence on Facebook and doesn't tweet. We joke that the only time he tweets is when he talks to birds. And we made a decided effort that in order to preserve the authenticity of that conversation, we'd actually want to have aspects of antisocial behavior within our social media strategy. So I think that's interesting.
No, I was just going to say, I thought the shopping cart analogy was really interesting. And I think the consumer's never been in a position technologically or socially or even anthropologically to pick and choose what clutter they wade through. And a lot of people find that incredibly overwhelming. But the consumer is driving the shopping cart, and that ability to curate what they want to hear is only going to increase. And so I think you have to come up with something that talks to people in an old-fashioned sense, that makes them want to put it in the cart, because it's even more difficult than it was before.
So speaking of old-fashioned, paper, tangible paper. To your trend of what's not onlineable is doomed, if I got that right. What are we looking at here? I mean, it's the migration of everything to internet-based services, and then now to the cloud. Are we talking about a truly paperless world in the next 5 to 10 years? Will Michael Scott from Dunder Mifflin be working at Google in 5 years?
I've been chasing him for a while, actually, but he's got too many other offers. I don't know, and I think it's there's personal opinions, and then there's global opinions. I mean, I love curling up with a book, a real book, you know, on a Sunday morning, but as much as anybody. But I think the really interesting question is are companies and brands reacting and adapting to trying to force old style uses of media into the new world? And what I mean by that is, I think that the way we work is so fundamentally different. You know, we're a bit of an exception because we just sort of try everything kind of ahead of most people because we're all dog fooding our products and all that sort of thing. But we're used to working fast and in a very different way. But I think a lot of the things that are coming out are trying to shoehorn old style ways of working into the new world when you don't have to do that. And you know, part of the video communication that I was talking about before is part of that. But working life is no longer, it's no longer structured around emails and spreadsheets and PowerPoints and meeting rescheduling and calendars, and it's actually just pivoting around people and projects. And a lot of the stuff that's coming out, whether it's cloud-based or paperless offices or whatever you want to call it, is it's thinking about, okay, this is the way we currently work, not how the sort of early adopters are working and how everybody's going to be working in 10 years' time. So I think being able to look at what that trend of a new way of working is going to be, and part of it is geography, you know, the backpack, it doesn't really matter where you are, or what device you're on, and you have different ways of communicating. You need to be able to, whatever product you make that relates to that, you need to be able to think for the future rather than try and shoehorn old ways of working into new technologies.
And Jeff, I mean, in terms of learning from other markets that are ahead of us in some of their technology adoption, are you seeing trends happening in Asia or in any of the BRIC markets or anywhere else that you think will be coming here more quickly as a result?
I hope they'll be coming more quickly. One thing that we see is that technology adoption, because they've skipped a couple of generations in some of these countries, mobile advertising is a much bigger force in Asia than it is here. And they're being much more progressive about how to reach out. I mean, honestly, this paperless thing scared me a little bit because working for a dead tree organization, I was like, can I have a head in the sand moment just so I can post? But to the point of some of what Ed was saying, at Fast Company, we've had to figure out iPad strategy, those kinds of things. We can't just put the magazine on an iPad and expect people to have a fulfilling experience. I think it's going to be helped by generational change. As we get people coming into our organization who grew up with this stuff, who are native speakers of these kinds of languages, that will really help. The question is, will we be able to let them speak and let them lead in the creativity? Or are we going to go to the traditional hierarchical, well, we've been doing this for so long, we know how to do it. So I think we have to be more open to the people who understand the technology the best, even if they look like they're 12. And I only look like I'm 16.
But that's a really interesting thing. The use of mobile in Japan is so far ahead of anything really, in the world, in the sense that, I remember one of the guys came back and sort of years ago showed the first sort of 3G phone to some guys in Japan, and they just laughed. It was the latest thing in the West, and yet, and it was interesting, Marian's sort of comment about the kind of meekness in response to the earthquake. I think we see a lot of that, and a lot of that will hopefully change. I think culturally being able to tap into and encourage Asian markets to lead creatively in sync with their technology is something that will really shape the way the world thinks in the future.
Marian, for you.
So I'm just going to say one thing. So if you look at the murals back there, so I walked in and had a really fabulous surprise this morning that a graffiti artist who works at the agency, who's I guess about 22 years old, took all my trends and graffitied them. If I had seen this before I came, I wouldn't have shown up with an old technology PowerPoint. I would have actually had all the chairs facing that and would have told the story of my trends through all those visuals. So I think that all of us are going to change, but we're only going to change to the level at which we become comfortable, and that certain things are going to still become preferred luxury items. So for me, a magazine or a book is still going to stay in my repertoire as a luxury item because I'm going to like it for the back deck. I'm going to like it for the beach. I'm not going to ever be comfortable with an iPad with my fingerprints because I'm too aesthetic. I'd rather look at a really nicely hardbound book. But I think people are going to pick and choose, and they're going to see certain things as luxuries in the same way a lot of us still buy antiques. Yeah. Why do we buy antiques? Because it's a luxury item.
One observation I'm having as well is that in this sort of hyper ADD world and society that we're living in, there's also a greater currency on the visual vocabulary of brands and how they visualize data. I know, Ed, that's something you guys in the lab work extensively on. I was hoping that you might just talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I can't remember the statistic, but when you compare the amount of images that a human being sees in New York 20 years ago to today, I mean, it's just terrifying. I can't remember the number, but it's a human being was sort of exposed to 50 images 20 years ago, and now it's 50,000 or something a day, basically all around on devices, on computer screens. And so that's just a great example of the clutter, the way that to actually break through, the bar is so much higher. And that extends more to visualizing data. I think that we've never been in a position where we can track so many things in terms of the raw numbers that are out there, whether it's airline flights or tax spending or whatever it may be. But I think this, again, it all gets back to storytelling. It's the ability to lump that data into something that will encourage someone to put it in their shopping cart. And I think that Aaron Coblin, who works in our group, who's an amazing guy who is an artist but specialises in data visualization, and we've got a little team that we're building out in San Francisco to do exactly that, because we have access to an awful lot of data in the world. And if you've seen Hans Rosling is a guy who does this incredibly well. He takes things that are just meaningless wads of Excel spreadsheets and turns it into something that not only do we understand, but we retain. And I think that being able to, as a brand, for example, being able to just synthesize something so that somebody sees it, puts it in their shopping cart and retains it is the real challenge. But there are tools that are coming which will make that accessible to everybody.
And I think every company now has to be a data company. If you are going to reach your target audiences, we have more resources in terms of data than we've ever had before, but how do you use that data? I was just reading the paper this morning, and there was a story about JCPenney hiring the retail head from Apple to try to revamp its stores. Its sales have been down, but Macy's have been up because Macy's has deployed data to understand hyper-locally what people in each particular market are buying and tailoring the stores to that. Nobody would think of Macy's as a data company, but that's what it has to be if it wants to beat its competition.
Marian, anything to add on that?
No, I think the hyper-local point is very, very crucial. If you think about Saks, I don't know how many of you shop at Saks, but Saks has been really revolutionary in that mid-range luxury, that every single Saks has a separate marketing plan and a separate marketing director, and they localize their premium, they localize their CSR, they localize their merchandise mix, and they even localize their hours to be reflective of the community so that there's no resemblance one store to the next store, even if they're 25 miles apart. And that's really has been part of their turnaround strategy. And I think it's that understanding of what happens, and it's all numeric. They know what happens. They know what happens at 8 o'clock in the morning and how to adjust it. And in many ways, by the way, that understanding didn't start here. It started at places like Zara, which were able to put merchandise into the store and watch what happened and adjust the merchandise mix the next day based upon their computing skills.
Yeah, it's real-time manufacturing. But to the hyperlocal point, communities are different. We're not just talking about geographic communities. We're talking about interest groups that gather around the same thing, whether it's a certain kind of fashion or a certain kind of style or an interest group.
Right.
So we can't just be thinking about old-fashioned communities in the geographic sense.
Where do you guys see hyper-local going in terms of brand advertisers? I mean, I think one of the challenges that we're starting to see with some of the burgeoning business models, whether it's the Living Social or the Groupons or whomever, is I think there's going to be a hard look at some of those companies 12 to 18 months from now about the true lifetime value of those customers who are coming in through affiliate channels for essentially, and motivated by incentives and discounts. What else beyond that are you playing with at Google, seeing in other cultures as you travel the world and write, looking around other people's shopping carts for that sort of just are markers of what advertisers are going to be able to do in the next 12 to 18 months to capitalize on this?
Well, I think again, it gets back to cutting through the noise. I mean, I think the whole, we always launched the wallet and offers the other day, and I think that experience of, that is literally my shopping cart, in the sense that I think it's when I can define what's pushed to me and my phone understands what's totally hyperlocal and what I really, really want to do. I want to be able to, I don't want stuff pushed to me from Starbucks. I want stuff pushed to me from my little local barista, who, I have 3 coffee shops in the East Village that I go to, and I want to be able to walk past and say, your loyalty, you've had 9, your 10th one's free. If you go in now, that's totally relevant to me. It's an ad, sure, but it's something that, I think that the really interesting thing when you think philosophically is that and we think about this a lot, sort of search-wise, but the best result to a search query in an ideal world and something that we're always striving for is an ad. An ad should be the best result. It should be something that is completely tailored for you when you want it, at the right moment, in the right location, at the right time. And that's sort of ad nirvana, but I think that the hyperlocal drive really, with mobile devices, and when you add location onto this sort of thing, it just makes it so much more realistic. And so for us, there's a lot of push behind the layer of geography and geolocation and mobile onto local businesses, and also helping them get online. I think there's over half the businesses in the US are not online, don't have a web presence.
Yeah,
and that's a staggering statistic. And so we're doing a lot of work to try and assist that and help, in that sort of all boats rise thing. Try and get, because now, you're going to be able to want to know where that local, the best bagel is, or but when you're there, not necessarily when you're at your desktop. Mm-hmm. It sort of completes the circle of geography. So there's a lot of focus on that.
And Jeff, from the emerging markets, given the mobile, advanced mobile penetration and other things there, are you seeing stuff from an advertising or cultural standpoint that you think will make its way here as adoption grows?
Well, I don't actually see local being as big a force in emerging markets as it is here right now, because a lot of those marketplaces, they're still opening themselves up to the world. They're still seeing these gateways to the rest of the globe, and so they want to feel tapped into the global economy, to global brands. So I think we're at a different point in our cycle in the US than in Africa and a lot of Asia. I met with Carlos Ghosn, the CEO of Nissan, not that long ago, and he said, we're obsessed with small cars right now for various economic reasons, environmental reasons. For places that haven't had cars accessible to the middle classes, they want the biggest damn car they can buy. So they're at a different place in the cycle, and I think we have to recognize that there are these local trends and different patterns, and not just impose what's going on in the US on emerging markets.
Just to add to that, I think one of the interesting things, though, is places in emerging markets have a very different attitude to community in a more old school sense than we do. I mean, how many of you know your neighbours? And that's a fact that I think is regretful, that we've moved away from old school community style communication, which still exists in developing markets. So I think it's really interesting, and I don't necessarily agree with the point on hyperlocal won't exist in emerging markets, because I think they have almost a better platform to launch off, because their sense of community and communication and the fabric of those communities in the real sense provides a greater springboard to a local experience. But
I think they're just not there yet.
Yep.
There's maybe one more aspect of this, is just collaborative consumption. Hyperlocal is going to drive us towards very collaborative consumption models. So the small business owner is going to be able to shop collectively. You're going to see things like Zipcar. You're going to see things like these bicycle sharing businesses. You're going to see all of the things that are going to allow people to come together and own less and participate in more happen. I think that's going to be another form of this whole hyper-local. You're going to see a lot of entrepreneurial businesses spring up that allow people to participate more frequently and own less.
There was an article, I think, in Fast Company about the case for generosity. Mm-hmm. Did I get that right?
It's the new sharing economy.
Yeah.
We're seeing companies like ThredUp, where a community online, young moms, can share baby clothes. So when your kid outgrows them, you don't want to throw them away. Goodwill, where's the local Goodwill? I don't even know. So you can trade your 6-month-old clothes for 1-year-old clothes and grow that way.
And I would not want to be in the textbook business right now. I think that the textbook businesses are going to suffer the way Levi's was always left out of about 20% of the Levi's economy because of the renewables business, where people would be reselling, but Levi's couldn't participate in the resale of old Levi's. I think the textbook business is going to go directly in that direction right now.
I'd just say, try sharing a cab. It's really funny. I've started trying to do it, and you're standing there, and 9 times out of 10, you're standing there, you're looking over the road, and the other person's got their arm out, and it's like, who's going to come around the corner first? Share it. It's really funny. People get really freaked out in New York.
Let's say that if that's a trend that takes hold, it will probably not be born from this city.
Well, let's do it. Let's start it today.
I have one last question.
Hashtag cab sharing.
Share cab.
One last question, then I want to turn it over to you guys and get some input from you. I just want to talk about gaming for a second. It's something that fascinates me, always has, and not the penetration of gaming and the opportunity for advertisers to do cool things with augmented reality apps or in-game product placements or any of that. It's the psychology of gaming. And are we looking at profound cultural shifts, and are we going to see gaming as a way of thinking, a way of behaving, a way of interacting start to break out into politics, culture, other things?
It's already there. The horse race mentality when the media is covering politics, that's a game. Foursquare is a game. Collecting frequent flyer miles, I love frequent flyer miles. I will take connecting flights if I have time to get more frequent flyer miles. That's a game. You know, reward points are a game, and we're always trying to win, whether winning means cashing in 25,000 miles, or getting more bonus points here or there, or being part of a loyalty program. Guild Group is a game. You want to get on at noon so that you can get the best thing in the size that you want it. So there is already the gamification of life all over the place. I just don't think we recognize it as such.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think that the sense that the word gamification was invented to describe something that's been around forever. And there are obviously technologies which help you exploit that in a positive and negative sense, which haven't been there before. But I think it is a fundamental part of human psychology to want to win, whether it's to get the best deal, or whether it's to, you know, to do with status, or whether it's to do with, you know, collecting frequent flyer miles. So I think it's always been there. But there are, if you combine it with the right story, then there are huge opportunities for brands to take advantage of it.
Think about it more broadly than what we tend to think of as games.
And I think the danger is sometimes companies don't think of it more broadly, and they think, oh, I need to create an online game for this promotion. And there's a lack of authenticity there. You know, people my age and younger aren't going to go to some lame online game that you created in a couple of months because you wanted me to click on this weird thing that I don't really understand. You know, so if you can build something that's honest and integral to your brand, not every brand should have an online game. But there are other games that would work with those brands.
Marian, a last thought on gaming before we turn it over to the audience?
Just I go back to my brutal honesty thing. Even with games, when there are winners, there have to be losers. And until we embrace the culture of losing, there's going to be a lack of authenticity. I mean, the great thing about the Foursquare mayors are people do get displaced. If you've become the mayor of the building, Jeff, somebody else isn't the mayor anymore. And that's actually a positive thing. And I think we need that authenticity at all times.
Could I just add one thing? One of the things we've really noticed with YouTube over the last couple of years, and talking about traditions that explode when YouTube's only just turned 6. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And it certainly feels like it's been around forever. But we've certainly found that there's a, you guys deal with reach and frequency, you know, all the time, and that's fair. But I think that one of the things we've really found with a lot of initiatives we've run is that it doesn't matter if the idea and the creativity and the storytelling is compelling. It doesn't matter if it's niche, because the ecosystem that radiates around it can be massive. Yeah. And I think that sort of goes to the almost against the winning is everything, because we've found that even if you open something up to a very small number of people, if people can participate and be heard on a platform like YouTube, and lots of other platforms out there as well, that's actually, participating is as great, and having your voice heard is as great as winning. And when you can do it on a massive scale, it's actually much more compelling.
That's great. Let's do some audience questions.
Toby Daniels, Social Media Week. Frictionless, borderless brand communications, how's it impacting your business, and how are you adjusting your strategies accordingly?
Well, I mean, I think that we've always had a mandate from Eric Schmidt over the last few years to launch everything in 40 languages, as an example, right? So the Google brand is something that is different, very different in lots of markets. I mean, people sort of assume that Google is a market leader everywhere, but it's absolutely not the case. You know, in places like Korea and Russia, and you know, we have very, very, very strong local competitors. And I think that our strategy has always been one of a deep understanding of local cultures and putting people in on the ground who can help shape that strategy. I mean, I think that it's probably easier for us in the sense that in the digital world, brand communication and frictionless brand communication is easier to change and tweak than it is if you're making hard goods, or for example. So I think that technology is such a rapid fire ability to tweak that I think that we're probably in a better position to do that than other companies.
Yeah, I don't know if it applies so much to Fast Company, given that we're pretty US focused. We have noticed how it's affected in unexpected ways some of the initiatives that we've had. So when we did our Most Innovative Companies issue, we partnered with Foursquare to create a badge. And that badge could be unlocked by going to places that you would find on the Most Innovative Companies list. And what we didn't expect was that a ton of Indonesians unlocked that badge. People who had no that we know of exposure previously to the Fast Company brand, but they were such obsessive Foursquare users that they wanted to unlock the badge. So it's just stuff like that that kind of opens our minds up to people being touched by our brand in ways that we wouldn't expect.
I think that when it comes to making news, you're going to discover that some things resonate. So when we launched the whole metrosexual concept, the single, it went like this. It launched here brilliantly. It launched in the UK brilliantly. It launched in India. It launched in Egypt. And it launched in Australia, to the point where you were having massive, massive uptake in the news. Wherever something's going to resonate, it bubbles. It's a spontaneous and authentic bubbling. You can't create it. Where to this day you say the word in China and people will glaze over, even though you say that exact same word, and it does no resonance in Arabic, and people immediately know exactly what you mean and they'll ask for your autograph. So China, no, and anywhere in any Arabic-speaking country, absolutely yes. So.
Joanna.
Yeah. Hi, Joanna Ruiz, Euro RSCG. Question about the brutal honesty trend, and whether you think that trend is going to change the way leading brands talk to consumers. Are brands going to become like the Seinfeld soup Nazi and get really, really brutal and honest? Because it's sort of in conflict with so much of the advertising, particularly broadcast advertising that we see, that feels inauthentic and more aspirational and not very honest at all.
I don't know how brutal you need to be in the advertising, but you have to be honest, because if you're not honest, people via social media will be honest on your behalf. And I think BP gave us a perfect case study of what not to do, because they had their Beyond Petroleum campaign, and they talked about going green and being socially responsible, and then they've had the debacles that they've had, which completely disprove that. They compounded the problem by not being honest and trying to tweet stupid, untrue things. And so you had BP Global PR, who came out and tweeted the truth. And you had the news media chasing. So I feel like you have to be honest, transparent, and authentic. That doesn't mean you tell everything. That doesn't mean you bear the soul of the company. But when you start lying, you're going to get caught out more easily than before.
I think consumers are so much more savvy in terms of when they're being bullshitted to be honest. I think that there's the risk return of not being authentic and being dishonest is far wider than it used to be, particularly with instant communication and rapid proliferation of not telling the truth. I think it's even more critical to be transparent and authentic in what you do.
I think it depends on how you do it too. I mean, just to cite Dos Equis for a second, you can imagine the conversations that we had with clients over the fact that in a packaged goods category, we were not showing our product until the last 5 seconds of a 30-second commercial. We had a spokesperson who was 3 times older than the target audience. And even worse, we had him say that he doesn't even always drink beer, but when he does, he prefers Dos Equis. Part of the reason that campaign, outside of its unbridled creativity, has resonated with consumers so much, I think, is because it was deeply authentic and acknowledged some behaviors. That the average 25-year-old guy drinks 12 kinds of beer. To get just in the fridge is a huge achievement. And I think part of what we were doing there was trying to take some of that honesty. Yeah, question in the back there.
Hi, I'm Francie from Euro. I thought it was really interesting the comment that was made about communities that are still really important and strong in developing countries. And I was wondering if you think that a reason why we turn so much towards online communities is because we don't live in strong communities anymore, but we have the desire to be in one?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I think it's a fundamental human trait. Humans, as a rule, like interacting with other humans, and when we shied away from that in a real sense, we moved towards it in a digital sense, and I think they're moving closer back together.
So much of what we're talking about this morning fundamentally is about relationships and human relationships. It's not about branding, advertising, marketing. It's about relationships and making connections with people. And when you don't have certain kinds of connections, people will look to fill that void with something. So I think when we're thinking about storytelling, we're thinking about social media. That's what I'm always keeping in mind when I'm doing stories is, what are the fundamentals of this relationship? What are the dynamics in play here? What are people trying to find from that brand or from that experience?
I'm interested in winning and losing and where America is. And you mentioned the emerging markets and technology innovation. They're not your exact words. But my observation is slightly different, and I want to throw it out at you. I think that the emerging markets are very, very fast adopters as opposed to innovators. And I think that that's where America's going to get in trouble, in that they don't adopt as quickly as the emerging markets. And any thoughts on that you may have?
One of the big challenges in China, as part of this China project, we've been trying to look beneath the surface. The New York Times likes to do the human rights stories, that's fine. That's not our thing. When we're looking at technology adoption and when we're looking at the patterns in China, we do see a lack of creativity. The internet sector is mostly run by people who have returned from the US or grew up in the US in China. So you do have that. But they're quickly adjusting their educational system to account for the creativity deficit. They know where they're good and where they're not. And I think that's where we're going to be in trouble in 10 or 20 years, is that we've got the creativity, but we don't have the fundamentals. I had a little argument with one of my colleagues recently because she was saying, oh, we need to be freed from standardized testing and from math scores and science scores. And I said, that's great for the self-esteem for now, but how's the self-esteem going to be doing in 20 years when we suck and China doesn't? So China's got the rote part of it down. They're layering on top of that. They're sending teachers to the US to learn about how to teach creativity. Once they've added that, we're really going to be struggling.
So the other thing I think we have to remember is the history of innovation in the US has been, we're a barrier culture. All of our telecom innovations have been about preventing people from having access to us. So we invented the answer phone to screen people out. We invented, a personal identification number so we'd know who was calling us so we could block people. We need to remember also a lot of our innovation has been about preserving this aura of privacy and self-protection so we can batten down the hatches. And I think that is a component of what's different. And most of those cultures are about opening up so people are always on. We're about always being able to hit the off button.
Yeah, I think that there was one of the advantages that America does have, and this may change in the East, for example, and this was an article in Wired, which is not a Fast Company, but another good publication. And there was a Wired article relatively recently about, and it ties interestingly into the broke chic thing, but it was comparing startups in Europe and startups in the US, and how, in a nutshell, if you have filed for bankruptcy and had failed business in Europe, you're totally stigmatized and you can't get funding, you're socially blackballed, etc. Whereas in the US, if you haven't been bankrupt and failed businesses, you can't get funding, because there is that entrepreneurial streak, which I think is really the spine of the US. And we see that, it's not just Silicon Valley, but we see that on Main Street. In the small business world, that 2 out of 3 jobs in the US are created by a small business, and there's that attitude of
comeback kids, we can build this and we can fix it, and I think that's what the US has to tap into. It's not necessarily tied to innovation in a technological sense, but I think that as a trait is something that America really has that needs to be tapped. I think on that, let's go USA note, proud to be an American. We'll end the session because I know we're already running a bit over, but a round of applause for Marian and our esteemed colleagues.